Let's break down the difference between communism, socialism, and democratic socialism, because a lot of people don't seem to really know what each one is. So for each one, I'm going to do a basic definition, I'm going to give you an example of a country that currently does it, and we'll look at how well does it actually work. Our first will be communism. Communism, at its most basic, is a system where nobody owns anything. Everyone is equal, and they all don't own shit. The government owns everything. The government is in total control of deciding what gets made, who makes it, where do you make it, how much does it cost to make it. All those things, the market doesn't determine it, the government determines it. Like, the textbook definition of communism is that everybody's sort of supposed to have collective power, but in truth, it's really been authoritarian governments. So just one person on top dictating down and kind of destroying the lives of everybody in the country. The best modern-day example of communism is North Korea. It's a truly authoritarian government where everything is completely nationalized and it's insulated in a way where there is nothing but control by the government. The government controls everything you do, every single day, down to the fucking haircut you can have. Giving communism a grade? I mean, I'd give it an F. If I could give it an F minus, I would. I don't know if that's a real grade, but regardless of what the worst grade is, communism gets it. Between the fact that the system just doesn't work economically, it also completely destroys human beings, and there's just human rights violations left and right. It leads to authoritarianism. It's a terrible system. Next is socialism. Now, socialism is sort of like collective ownership of resources. So healthcare and energy and transportation, things like that, it would be collectively owned by the population. Sounds similar to communism, but it is different in the sense that communism is meant to just equal out everybody. Socialism is meant to go, we're going to redistribute wealth by making sure that nobody gets too wealthy and everybody has collective ownership over something. Now, to me, there are two different buckets of socialism. There is sort of more authoritarian socialism, and then there's democratic socialism. I'm going to focus first on authoritarian socialism. So within authoritarian socialism, there's what's called market socialism, which is what you can kind of consider modern-day China to be, where you have a somewhat socialist, communist government regime, but there's elements of free market capitalism to a certain degree injected into it. It's this sort of odd fusion where the market does have some capitalist tendencies, but in the end, most major systems are going to be controlled by the government, like banking and energy and things like that. Next is state socialism, which is sort of like modern-day Cuba. Modern-day Cuba has, essentially government control over things like education and healthcare, but they don't do an awesome job at it, and they also don't kind of offset it with any sort of democratic tendency or with any economic freedom beyond some markets where there is some economic opportunity, but it mostly feels like communism light. Another really good modern-day example of more authoritarian socialism is Venezuela. Venezuela has seen nationalized oil, telecommunications, all kinds of things like that, and they've also seen attempts at trying to reduce poverty, but in the end, corruption, authoritarianism, things like that got in the way of the system, and it really just became sort of like another version of communism to a certain degree. How has authoritarian socialism worked out? Not awesome. D minus, maybe an F. Something in that zone. It really hasn't come together. The only reason I give it a notch above communism is communism just never works, whereas this stuff, if you take the corruption out of it, there's a chance it could theoretically work for the right country, but it's certainly not something that the United States could ever do. Last, we're going to talk about democratic socialism, which this young man tried to bring to the US back in 2016 and 2020 when he ran for president. Essentially, at its most basic, democratic socialism is exactly what it sounds like. It's a system where people are democratically elected, and the attempt is to try to create a big social safety net so the country can operate comfortably and everybody can get the resources they need. In this system, private enterprise still very much exists. It's free market capitalism. The only difference is that the market is much more heavily regulated than it is in, say, for the United States. And the regulations are designed to ensure that labor standards are being met and people are not being taken advantage of. And where people have really tripped over democratic socialism is the cost, because there is no question that democratic socialism comes with much higher taxes for people across the board. Not just wealthy people, but people in the middle class and somewhat in the lower class as well. One great example of a modern-day country that uses this system is Sweden. Sweden has a very high marginal tax rate for its citizens, but it also provides a very healthy social safety net. That safety net includes free healthcare, free education, free childcare, unemployment that extends for about 2 years at around 90% of your salary, disability is 100% covered. The list goes very, very long. There's a ton of stuff you just get for free. Public transportation is free. I'm sure I could keep thinking of things. Just to give you a little context on the taxation part, this is a chart for Sweden's income tax. Essentially, this is around $60,000. So if you make below $60,000, this is your tax rate. You don't pay this national income tax, you pay just a municipal tax. But if you're over that amount, you pay essentially 52% in taxes. I know, that sounds like a lot, and especially compared to what we pay in the US, it is a major, major increase in your taxes. But you have to consider the context. How much do you pay out of pocket for healthcare premiums? How much do you pay for healthcare out of pocket? How much do you pay if you want to go to college, if you want to send your kid to a private school? How much do you pay for childcare? How much do you pay if you have to miss work or lose your job? How much do you have to worry about those circumstances? How much do you have to pay for transportation to get to and from your work or around your city? When you factor in all those out-of-pocket costs, the actual economic analysis is that people in our country pay more due to our out-of-pocket costs combined with our relatively high taxes compared to a country like Sweden with a social safety net that is robust and also a very high tax rate, but almost no out-of-pockets. So how well has this system worked? Incredibly well. I would grade it as an A or an A minus. Look, it depends on what your goal is. If you want to be the United States and be a powerhouse that invests $1 trillion into your military and have a different approach to things, you probably aren't going to be like Sweden. So this idea of injecting a true democratic socialist structure into the US overnight, like Bernie Sanders wanted to do, is not a good idea. However, the Democratic left at this point is trying to inject little pieces at a time so we can gradually make our way towards Sweden, because Sweden has a very stable and powerful economy. It has the happiest people in the world by pretty much every single metric. People feel safe, they feel supported, and despite their high tax rate, their quality of life is extraordinarily high. So, when you hear people like this guy telling you that Democrats want to make America communist, you can clearly tell from what I've broken down, that's not true. Do they want to be authoritarian socialists? No, they don't want to do that either. What the left is actually trying to do is to slowly inject pieces of democratic socialism into America over time. For example, trying to do Medicare for all, trying to create, community colleges being free. It's like taking little chunks of what they do overwhelmingly in places like Sweden and do it little pieces at a time in the US to ease us towards something that is working in other countries. But the point is, the more you know about specific things like this, the more assholes like this guy can't lie to you and go, it's going to be communist. It ain't going to be communist. Shut the fuck up.